if I can take some questions from the audience, and then I'll go to social media.
I'm Shadra Kazaki. I describe myself as an adult social veteran. Now, I've had His Excellency say much about entrepreneurship. My question would be, what is your take on social entrepreneurship? Because I think we have talked about entrepreneurship for a long time, but when we talk about social entrepreneurship, I've read much about that, and I think that's the kind of entrepreneurship that we need. One that has social in it, because we have had entrepreneurship, but like now capitalism is there, but now we are talking about capitalism that is also looking at the social part. So, what's your take on that, and how is the US working towards developing that? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Andrew?
Morning, my name is Andrew Franklin. I'm a U.S. citizen who's lived in Kenya since March of 1981. Mr. Ambassador, about 10 days ago you wrote in your columns in newspapers, standing with civil society, but you also stated, as a general rule, regulation should be as simple and as transparent as possible. Regulation should embrace diversity. Regulation must not be used to silence opinions or stifle views that the powerful do not share. I support that. Does anyone not? Is this also the U.S. government position on immigration issues, property issues, commercial matters in this country, where U.S. citizens living and working in Kenya have been increasingly disadvantaged due to government of Kenya laws, regulations, and attitudes? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Martin Cabin from True. I work with changing mindsets, and I'd like to change the American people's mindsets if I could. But maybe you can do something. Our president at one point was trying to debate the travel warnings of several countries, and America is one of them, in terms of tourism. Because of terrorism, there are constant travel warnings. And I agree that we are terrorism here. We do not deny that. But terrorism is in many places, and yet they're not necessarily travel warnings in every place. So my question to you is, how can Kenya and the US collaborate on changing that? Because that's also changing the mindset of Americans. It's maybe bringing them up in different ways so they have more awareness and understanding of well outside of the US, and also of all the treasures that are here, because there are many places you can go to Kenya. I think you agree, feed the elephants or whatever you want to do, because Kenya is amazing. And how do we ensure that we can still bring our tourists in a safe way? So what is that? What would that collaboration be? We need that too.
Great.
First, on the question about social entrepreneurship. I certainly think that the social entrepreneurship is important. Now, I would suspect that if we asked sort of 10 people what their definition of social entrepreneurship is, we probably would get 11 different views, because I think what's important in the first instance is entrepreneurship itself. It's innovation, it's creativity, it's energy, it's dynamism, it's people working to create new things, whether they're products or services or whatever they are. It's the entrepreneurship part which is important. At the same time, clearly, the social part is significant. And so an example of what I would sort of see perhaps as social entrepreneurship is something around, green energy, or maybe helping people in an informal settlement deal with waste products when they can. So it's things that will benefit, clearly have some additional and broader benefits as well. But again, I think you would get different views about this. The United States certainly does a number of different things around entrepreneurship in Kenya and more generally globally. And let me just sort of give you one example. We have in Kenya what is certainly a unique youth program that we support called Yes, Youth Can. And you probably can figure out where the name came from, but it was established a few years ago. And so today it's 1 million Kenyan young people organized in 22,000 youth bunges. One of the ways in which the United States supports Yes Youth Can and the National Youth Bunge Association is we've set up SACCOs, credit unions, for a lot of the different counties and places where the groups are organized. And those SACCOs then lend money to help young people, entrepreneurs, start businesses. So I mean, it really is kind of a direct sort of financial support. So I've seen down in places like Bangladesh and Mombasa, young people who had set up small businesses to do things like renting out chairs or computer access services so people could go get to the internet, or chicken farms, that kind of thing. So there is a lot that we're doing to support entrepreneurship generally in Kenya. And I do think that as part of that, we're supporting people who are working in what you might define as perhaps somewhat more social entrepreneur spaces. But it's a critically important part of the effort, and I do think a lot of good and a lot of value can come out of it. And I would just emphasize that I really do think that this Global Entrepreneurship Summit is going to be a special moment for Kenya and for the United States. And I'll tell you that sort of beyond the summit itself, which is obviously going to be a very focused sort of event, I know that the government of Kenya, and we're working with them, will be doing other things around the summit itself. So there'll be other opportunities to engage more widely with entrepreneurs and business people, and share ideas, and just generally to build and strengthen the network of entrepreneurs in the country. So there will be other things that will emerge, other announcements that will be made, other events that will be held around the summit itself. And then I hope beyond the summit we'll also see things that will help carry forward the benefits, carry forward the legacy, make this thing sustainable across time. On the question of transparency and my column, and I hope you all read my column. Obviously, the United States supports a level playing field for American businesses. And obviously, we have worked extensively and done things to support that. When we see instances where we think the playing field is not level, or where there are problems for American businesses, obviously we raise those with the government of Kenya. Just generally, I do think that it's critically important that business regulation be simple, transparent, and fair. This is certainly a subject that I've discussed with Kenyan government officials, to include the top officials in this government, and it's an ongoing source of conversation. And I do think that President Kenyatta and the government have put in place some mechanisms to hold discussions with business people through their KEPSA meetings, for example, that they do about quarterly now, where these issues come up. So there is an opportunity to discuss this, to raise these issues, and to focus on them. It's critically important, I agree with you. It's something that needs to be in place. And having it in place will encourage more investment and will encourage more engagement. Travel warnings and security. There are a whole host of kind of angles that we could come at this issue from. So let me just try to kind of summarize a couple of points. First, Kenya is an extraordinarily beautiful and rich country, and there are things here that I wish everybody in the entire world could come see, that I hope everybody can come see. Whether it be, the beautiful Masai Mara, or, the north, or Mombasa, or many different things. And it is critically important that if tourists are going to come, that security be in place. And we have done everything we can, and certainly are continuing to do more to help build security in Kenya. I mentioned things like the Security Governance Initiative. We do share, beyond that, we certainly share information, as I said. We provide equipment, we provide training to the government of Kenya. So we collaborate quite closely with the government of Kenya on providing security. And it's important, as I said in my remarks as well, that this be done in a way that helps to build long-term security, so with full respect for human rights and the rule of law. So we are doing a lot, and we are significantly, in the face of the threat from Al-Shabaab, we have significantly ramped up our security assistance. We're over $100 million at the moment a year. So that's a lot of security assistance. Now, the travel warnings. This is an issue that comes up quite a bit. And let me just be plain. The United States issues travel warnings to inform its citizens about the security situation in countries. We do this in many different countries. So we have a travel warning in place for Mexico. We have a travel warning in place for the Philippines. We have a travel warning in place for a number of different countries. All it does is inform our citizens about the security situation, about terrorism or about crime or about other issues that they might confront. The first obligation of any government is to inform its citizens, and that's what the travel warning does. The travel warning does not tell Americans, do not come to Kenya. That's not what's in there. That's not what it says. And when Americans ask me, should they come here, I say, sure, come here, absolutely. It's a beautiful country. Take proper precautions. Look at the travel warning. You'll get more information. That's what the travel warning does. And I have to be candid with you. I think that the issue with tourism in Kenya at the moment is not so much the travel warnings, it's the security situation. Because the reality is that a story about an attack in Garissa or on Westgate Mall on the front page of major newspapers or on major television stations around the world, that's where people get their information. The travel warnings are I don't think, certainly in the case of the United States, they're not a significant, I don't think they're significantly affecting the tourism levels.
You're saying it's more to do with this sort of the insecurity?
I'm saying it's more to do with the insecurity.
And the news.
And the news and the realities that are happening. So what's critical here is that, at the end of the day, the security situation be dealt with, so that tourists can come and see this beautiful country, and so that Kenya can continue to build a future that it wants. Maybe 3 more questions.
You got a lot more than 3. Can I take a few more? Yes.
My name is Samburu Washiko. An independent consultant working here in Nairobi. I advise companies and developing partners, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, an American foundation. So, Ambassador, you made a very interesting reference to the work that agencies such as the CDC does here, really important, expansive work that developing partners does in a country like Kenya, but also right across the country. But I'm trying to juxtapose that reality with a pronouncement that President Uhuru just made yesterday, referring to Africans' reliance on development aid. I'm wondering what your thoughts are when you also engage with pronouncements like those. Is that indicative of an important intellectual shift that is perhaps taking place, or should we be reading this as President Kenyatta speaking to a local African audience? Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Ravi. Come from the events before. I work in the area of improving skills. And this country has a tremendous youth population who are yearning to work and get jobs. Just a comment rather, it was good to see American businesses like Ricky's making investments near Machakos, I believe. What are your thoughts on education and how the youth are being prepared to work in the country and to prepare themselves for the working environment? Because I believe there are things in the system which we're not being prepared in the right way, and often companies say, oh, he doesn't have the right skills, etc., etc. And the second question is Somalia. America has always had some sort of interest with Somalia. What is your take on the region? And it seems like there are a lot of positive tidbits coming up from different members of society. I bumped into a pilot at the gym the other day, and he says there's more work happening in places like Algesia and some other areas than even in Kenya. So just to report.
Yeah, I heard the same actually.
Good morning. Yeah, I'd like to thank Dr. Godec for coming here today.
My name is Abdullah, and I'm an ecologist in training. Fantastic work with elephants. Been following with Twitter and Godec. My question is, what are your thoughts about the conservation efforts in Kenya? And are we doing enough to protect our elephants?
Thank you.
Thanks very much for the questions. First, on President Kenyatta's remarks on development assistance yesterday, I have seen the press reports. I have not seen his actual remarks. So I'm not in a position to comment specifically on what President Kenyatta said, but let me just make a couple of comments around the issue generally, because I do think it's an important question. First, back when I started working in Africa many years ago, development aid was a huge part of, frankly, development in Africa. And now the situation has changed, and the reality is this is a great change. The reality is that investment from the private sector is significantly more important to what's happening in Africa, to creating jobs, to lifting people out of poverty and to building prosperity. It's much more important. And we should all be grateful for this change. The United States does not want to be in Kenya or in Africa or anywhere forever as a development partner. We don't want to forever be providing, for example, support for whatever it may be. What we want is your country to be prosperous and to be every bit as wealthy as other countries around the world. So I do think the transition that's taking place is very important. I do think that today development assistance has a very important role to play. So I think that the programs we're running in education, in agriculture, various things, I do think that they're very important, and I know that President Kenyatta welcomes them. I know that the government welcomes them, and I believe that the Kenyan people, certainly from all of my engagements with them, also welcome the assistance that we're providing as we move toward the day when this will no longer be necessary. Just one other point on this. Some of the work that CDC is doing might be characterized as development aid, but some of it is already what you would call kind of full partnership. I mean, our research together with the Kenyan medical doctors and researchers, that's a full partnership. That's not development assistance. That's something in the interest of the United States, it's in the interest of Kenya, it's in the interest of the world. If we're trying to stop malaria, if we're working on finding a vaccine for malaria, and Kenyan researchers are right there alongside American researchers, I don't call that development assistance. I call that working together to prevent a deadly disease which can, frankly, infect anyone if you're in the right parts of the world. So that I wouldn't call development assistance. On education and are youth prepared, I would actually tell you that you and certainly businesses are probably better able to judge that question than I am. But I do think that education is critically important. And so we do have big education programs here. I helped to launch with President Kenyatta a program called Tusome, which is a learning program for very young people, for young boys and girls who are entering, I guess, just sort of what we would call first and second grade. It's intended to help to increase their ability to read and do maths. And in fact, we did extensive testing before we put this program in place, and it doubles the number of boys and girls who are able to read after they get out of kind of their first year in school. So that's a pretty significant thing, and I do think that over time that will feed through the system and will help prepare Kenya's young people. It is critically important that young men and women have the skills, are able to read, write, do maths when they leave school. It's a challenge in the United States sometimes, it's a challenge in Kenya, it's something we've all got to work on together. There are a variety of ways to help increase the ability of people to do these things, whether it be through private sector training programs or better public sector training or establishing more kind of what we would call kind of technical colleges in the United States. So there's some things that can certainly be done in that area. But it is an area where focus is needed. It's very important. On Somalia, the good news in Somalia is that there is real progress. For the first time in a long time, there is real progress in Somalia. There is a central government that's slowly but surely getting stronger. There are regional governments being set up. The political progress is there. There are still huge, huge challenges there. But I think what's happening is exciting and important. It's exciting for Somalia, for the people of Somalia, and it's exciting for the region. So I think it's a good thing. There certainly is new economic activity as well. You know, and I think we can attribute this to a number of things. Obviously, first of all, the Somalis themselves have made some progress here, which is great news, because they're the ones who ultimately bear the biggest price for what's happening. But it's also really the world coming together. So the architecture is in place. We have an international understanding. There are UN Security Council resolutions that have put in place the international architecture. There's a commitment from the United States and the Western European governments to invest in the future in Somalia by providing the funds that are necessary to do a range of things around security and other things. There's the commitment from the regional governments, Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, and the others that are helping to bring stability. And frankly, the willingness of Kenya and the other countries to put forces there to frankly do the fighting and take the losses. So, I mean, Kenyans are fighting and dying in Somalia for the sake of stability and peace for the future of Somalia. These are very important things, and frankly, I commend Kenya for being prepared to do so, and I do think there's real progress, and I hope it will continue. There's certainly a lot of things that cause concern, and there's a lot to do, a huge amount that still needs to be done, but I am hopeful at least that Somalia is on the right road. On conservation in Kenya, there is no doubt that conservation in Kenya is something that is very important. You know, Kenya has an extraordinarily rich natural heritage. The wildlife is amazing, and preserving it and protecting it for Kenya and for the world is very important. There are a lot of things that have happened in the past couple of years. I was very pleased to see President Kenyatta do the ivory burn, 15 tons of ivory. I think that was important. I think that it's important that, you know, KWS continue to get stronger and that it do the right sorts of things by way of protecting wildlife. You know, basically the challenges are around stopping poaching, stopping trafficking, and stopping demand. Those are the three challenges, and there's a lot to do still in each of those areas. Too many elephants, too many rhinoceroses, too many other wild creatures are dying. And I think that you know, there is more that needs to be done, certainly by Kenya. There needs more that needs to be done by the international community, by the United States. And I'm certainly committed to being part of that, and the United States is committed to being part of that effort to help preserve Kenya's extraordinary heritage.
Do you know, Ambassador, when I was young, we used to drive up, I was from Mombasa, and we used to count the number of elephants that would cross the road. And I remember when I was about 10, we counted over 500. Do you think that this situation, because if you read some of these doomsday scenario projections, they're very frightening. You know, the trajectory doesn't, are we able to arrest this trajectory, do you think? And then being an economist, you know, if you look at prices of things like rhino horn, it's the most expensive commodity anywhere in the world. How does that, you know, are we doing enough to break that? You know?
Let me put it this way. I think, first of all, that unless the killing is stopped, in the not too distant future, there will be no elephants and no rhinos left in the wild. If the killing is not stopped, there will be none. And that would be a tragedy. I do think there's more that needs to be done. There's more that needs to be done by Kenya. There's more that needs to be done by the United States, by the other international partners, by civil society, by all of the different groups and organizations that are part of this. Let me divide the problem sort of up into two pieces, though, because I think there's an issue with poaching, and that is a serious problem. And my hope is that soon we'll get a handle on that. Soon we'll stop the poaching, we'll stop the trafficking and will stop the demand. And there's a variety of things that sort of should, I think, make that possible. But even beyond that problem, there's the question of human-wildlife conflict. There's the reality that people need space to live, they need space to farm, they need space to graze cattle, they need space for cities. I mean, so there is the challenge. So some way to deal with this question of human-wildlife conflict has got to be found. So that's why, for example, the United States is very much involved with the Conservancy community here, Northern Rangelands Trust, and we're putting millions of dollars into this because there is some indication that conservancies can help do what's necessary to kind of reduce the conflict between humans and wildlife, to allow the animals to have the space that they need to survive and to thrive, and also allow humans to, obviously, you know, people, as I said, they need livelihoods. They need ways to survive. So I think in the long run, that human-wildlife conflict part of the challenge, it's the more serious challenge. Not that poaching isn't a huge problem. It is a huge problem. It does need to be addressed. Much more needs to be done. But in the longer term, it's human-wildlife conflict that we've got to find some way to address.
I just wanted you to touch on the Wrigley's investment. What was the size of it? And
Sure. The Wrigley's investment, I think, was great news. Wrigley's is putting $65 million US into building a factory in Machakos, and they're doing so because they see the potential of the market in Kenya and in East Africa. Their products are selling, and I think it's a sign of the growing middle class. In Kenya, I think it's a reality that people have more disposable income, and so it really is a mark of confidence from a very important American company in East Africa. But, you know, what has really struck me, and you and I were talking about this earlier, just before we came in here, you know, I've spent a lot of time in Africa, and I've been, you know, I've done a lot of stuff on the economic and commercial side in addition to security. And in the last year, I can tell you, I have seen more American companies coming in, interested in investment than ever before. These are big American companies, but they're also medium-sized American companies. So there is just a change, I think, going on here. There's more interest. It's interest in building manufacturing plants. It's interest in other sorts of things. Now, I don't know that all of these investments are going to, or potential investments are going to come to fruition, but I hope so. Let me just mention that there are a couple of other major investments that potentially will exceed $1 billion US. $1 billion US. And now we're getting up to a scale where you're talking about thousands of jobs or tens of thousands of jobs being created as a consequence of these investments. And you know, what's really critical is whether, you know, it be encouraging the next Wrigley's investment or, you know, whatever. It's critical that Kenya keep the environment or get the environment right, because there clearly are things that are good here and there are things that are a problem. And so, you know, going forward, Kenya needs to continue to make progress on simplifying business rules, reducing corruption, strengthening governance, doing all of the other things. And then I think you will see more investments from American companies.
Thank you very much. My name is Deto. I'm in WSI. I was hoping that Pastor you could comment on American foreign policy on clean energy and the dream of finding a sustainable way. And this is in regards to Waxman-McKay Act. One of the provisions of 2009 was a 17% reduction in carbon emission.
And I'll add into that foreign policy question, there's somebody come across about the Look East.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Mary Gomez. I'm not quite sure that questions as much as I comment. Say that you don't tell people not to come to Kenya, which is ironic because you can't remove the fact that you tell them Kenya is unsafe, but do with that information as you please. That is intertwined. So unfortunately, if the information given to people is representing Kenya, then that is, in fact, telling people not to come to Kenya. So I don't think those are two separate things. Number two, development aid, coming back to it. What does America gain from it? Because I think it would be insincere to say that you take money from American citizens and give them to Kenya for no, absolutely no reason. It's a very honest question. Because in very many situations, Uganda passed the anti-LGBT law. The American government made a statement about it. The American government makes very many statements about respecting diversity. The anti-LGBT law might not be what America wants, but if it's what Ugandans want, why would America be interfering with it? It's true. Ideals are different in every single country. So whether we want to introduce it or not should be Kenyan business. And the fact that countries threaten countries with withholding aid is interference. So how is the US government going to deal with reducing interference in other countries? Because giving aid based on what you think should or should not be done in a country is holding in ransom. It is not developing countries. It's having them sing to your own tune. Please address those two issues.
Thank you. Well, yeah.
Well, my name is Ben, and Your Excellency, what were your two names again?
Robert F. Godec.
Yeah, I have asked that tongue in cheek because if you ask Kenyans now, there are those who still remember Smith Hempstone, Aurelia Brazil, and Smith Renebaga, but you struggle to know your name.
But that's probably a good thing.
My question is, has the American policy shifted? Those things they used to call American values, those ones of defending democracy, human rights, and such things. Because I see even in our country here, there is a shrinking of the democratic space. Let's face it. The civil society has been pushed under. The media, if not owned, if not playing according, because the ownership question is here in Kenya. Those who own the media are the ones in power. And then the journalists are seriously intimidated. Laws are being passed, and there is even a reversal. Parliament is being used to reverse whatever the constitution we passed in 2010. And all over Africa we are seeing it. The movement towards people changing the constitution. Burundi is an example here. Rwanda is another example, and several other examples. But then American voice is not there at all. Is it that America is weakened insofar as global issues are concerned? Or is it that the Obama administration has decided to be disengaged? We want to know more here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. A lot of good questions. I have to say, it's great to see so many good questions. I'm just going to stand up for a minute just because I like to move around a little bit. On clean energy, clean energy is very important. And the reality is that today we face an extraordinary challenge from climate change. And we all know that. And in fact, the evidence is growing that something needs to be done about the problem. And the United States is certainly very committed to that. It is a challenge. It's a challenge to get everybody around the world to do what's necessary, all of the people who are putting stuff, even in those in the United States, to reduce their emissions. And, President Obama went to China. We reached a good agreement with China recently on doing some things that I think will help. I think we put in place a variety of ways and policies and programs to encourage, for example, power companies to use more green technologies. I will tell you that something very specific that we're doing here in Africa, Power Africa, does focus particularly on the importance of green energy. So hydro power, for example, or geothermal would be a good example, or solar. There's a variety of ways, and wind power, there's a variety of ways that we're supporting clean energy, green energy, and doing things. We also have a climate change program here that we're doing directly with the government of Kenya. So we are engaged on this issue across many different fronts, and I do think it's critically important to the future of the country. In fact, it's one of the biggest challenges that we face, dealing with the problem of greenhouse gases and ultimately reducing, frankly, climate change and the threat to our children and our children's children. On misrepresenting Kenya, look, I've read the travel warning. I know exactly what it says, and it reports the facts. It says that there was an attack in Garissa and that 148 people were killed. That is a fact. It doesn't say Kenya is broadly unsafe. In fact, it says thousands of Americans come to Kenya every year and don't have a problem. That's what it says. It does not say, do not come to Kenya. It reports the facts. It reports the facts that you all, because you live in Kenya, know. But someone who lives in Iowa and who's thinking about coming to Kenya is not going to know these things. Not going to know what sorts of security risks that they face. The American government has an absolute obligation to inform its citizens. And that's what the travel warning does. It provides the facts so that American citizens can go to one place and get an objective, fair, and reasonable statement of things that have happened, and some advice about how they can protect themselves when they come. That's what it does. It is not a misrepresentation of the situation in Kenya. And again, I would encourage the thought that what Kenya should do about the security problem in Kenya, in the issue that they have around tourism, is address the security situation. That's the fundamental challenge. Address the security situation. Deal with the problem of terrorism, deal with the problem of crime, and then there won't need to be a travel warning. We lift the travel warnings in countries when there's real progress, and that's what needs to happen.
Ambassador, what about this flights that we're expecting, direct flights from the US to Kenya? Have you got any information on that? Do we expect that to happen now?
We're making good progress. There are two parts to the direct flight question. First, there is kind of the safety and security question. So there's the issue of can Kenya be a last point of departure for the United States? So that's
That's the key.
Well, that's one key part of it. And so the question is, will, for example, at the airport, at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, will the systems, procedures, and policies be in place that allow us to have Kenya be a last point of departure to the United States? The other issue is whether Kenya can be what we call a Category 1 airport for the purpose of service for aircraft.
Yeah.
So both of these areas, we've been doing a huge amount of work together. The embassy has brought technical team after technical team. We've worked with the private sector, we've worked with the Kenya Airports Authority, we've worked with the Ministry of Transportation. We've provided all kinds of support and assistance, and good progress is being made. So I am very hopeful that at some point we will get to the point where Kenya can have direct flights to the United States. There is no reason that Kenya cannot have this. There is no reason. And it's just a question, again, of getting through these additional steps that are still needed. And good progress is being made.
I think there was an aid question.
There's a development aid
What do
question.
you get out of aid? And then if I might merge that foreign policy question with a question that's come out over social media, asking about China, asking about the US, how does the US view China in Kenya,
Sure.
and the Look East policy? Okay,
On development aid, I think a couple of points are important. Obviously there's sort of different types of aid that are out there. And the vast majority of our aid in Kenya and elsewhere in Africa at the moment, it's really around healthcare. It's around, for example, HIV/AIDS. The United States does this, frankly, for humanitarian reasons. It does it because we don't want to see people dying. And just as you might, for example, if your cousin or a member of your family needed immediate medical attention and didn't have any money, you might give them the money to help, and you might do it out of the goodness of your heart. That is what, frankly, I have to tell you, I mean, I've been involved in U.S. government decision making for a very, very long time at the highest levels of our government. And I will tell you, that is the motivation. The motivation is, it is wrong, flat wrong. If I have money, but you're dying, and I can help, it is the right thing to do to help. And that is what something like, the PEPFAR program is intended to do. It's intended to help. Now, you asked about our views. Now, on, for example, the LGBTI issue, and obviously we have strong views on this issue. We believe that people have rights and that people should be treated fairly, and everyone should have a right to live their lives as they choose, just as you have that right. We think others have that right. Do we express those views publicly? Yes. Do we cut off humanitarian assistance as a consequence of you're not doing something that we want? No, we don't do that. As a general rule, we do not do that. And there might be some forms of assistance that might stop under some sets of circumstances, but as a general rule, if we're providing food so you can live, or we're providing health assistance, those sorts of things will not change. On the question of China, China is obviously an emerging, growing power, and they do many important things. I think that the United States is certainly happy to see China here in Kenya or other places in Africa doing things like building roads. Obviously, if a road is built, Americans can drive on it too, along with Kenyans and others. We're happy to have the road. I think what's important is that what China offers be transparent, and that if China provides a loan to Kenya, that Kenyans make the judgment that that loan, that deal, that offer is the best deal for Kenya. It needs to be clear what's on offer, it needs to be on a level playing field, and it needs to be a transparent thing. That is what is important. China, I have no problem with China being in Kenya or Africa. It's fine. And again, it's just a question of ensuring that what's being offered is transparent and in the best interests of Kenya or Africa generally. And that's a judgment for you to make. It's a judgment for you to make.
Do you think we get enough information to make that judgment?
Well, I would certainly like to see more information in some cases.
Okay.
On the question of has American foreign policy changed, and am I as well known as Smith Hempstone? Obviously, that's a question for you and others to judge. I will tell you this, though, and I just sort of ask the question, and it's an interesting sort of link to the previous question, because on one hand, I hear, we don't really want to hear what you think about some specific issue, and on the other hand, I hear, well, yeah, we want you to, speak out and say what you think, what America thinks. Look, my personal, strongly held view is that Africa and Kenya are beyond the days when other governments from other places around the world should be lecturing Kenya or Africa generally. Kenyans need to be in the lead. You need to build your own future. You need to figure out what is right and what is wrong and how you want your country to run. I am going to speak out when I think there are important issues for the United States, or when American values are important. I would just observe that I have done so. We had a nice quote a few minutes ago from an op-ed I just wrote recently about civil society and others, and there are a number of others at other times that I've done around freedom of the media, around the importance of civil society and preserving the space for it to do its work. So there's been a number of public statements, speeches, and other things around these issues. And, but it's certainly true that I do not call a press conference every day. I don't do that. And I think at the end of the day, you know, it's because Kenyans need to be in the lead. I think just sort of one other kind of point on this, in addition to the public statements that you see, there's a lot going on privately. And I want to assure you that when there are important issues around freedom, around civil society, around the values that Americans care about, that I am talking to the top levels of the government of Kenya about these issues constantly. So there are a lot of things happening, and I could spend a lot of time going through all of the different things that have happened, and all of the different conversations, all of the different engagements, all of the different programs, all of the different efforts. They're there. My objective in Kenya is not to become famous. My objective in Kenya is to build the relations between Kenya and the United States. My objective is to support American values. My objective is to help the people of Kenya build the future they want.
And I suppose it touches on a very interesting point about being a 21st century diplomat, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you have to be a showman, or is it better to be, you know, working behind the scenes?
You know, I've had to learn a lot of new things because I've been around for a very long time. So when I first started in diplomacy, we didn't have Twitter,
yes,
and we didn't have Facebook. We didn't have all of these different ways to do things. So I've had to learn new technologies and new ways to do things. But to really get to your sort of more directly to your question, look, you know, I mean, the world is changing, and I think Kenya is changing, and yeah, I mean, I think it does get to the point that we need different ways of doing things. And I really don't think that Americans want to lecture the world all the time. I mean, I don't think it's always a good thing. I mean, there are times when we have to stand up and be clear and say what we think, and frankly put on public pressure and put on private pressure and all the rest of it. But I do think that the world is better off if the vast majority of the time, you know, people are leading themselves and they're building the country that they want.
Ownership.
Yeah, they've taken ownership of what it is. And look, I mean, look at what Kenya has done. Look at the 2010 Constitution. It's an extraordinary document. So just to sort of add on to this thought, you have put in place an extraordinary Constitution. It's now the opportunity, you've got the opportunity to put this Constitution into reality, to make it a reality, to implement it. And it is a huge challenge, and Kenya is having a conversation with itself about power. That's what's going on here. I mean, and not to go on for too long here, but I think this conversation is very, very important. You've created, you know, you put in place a new constitution. You have old institutions like the presidency or the National Assembly that have new roles and responsibilities. You have new institutions like a Senate and devolved county governments that are wholly new. And now you're trying to figure out who gets to make what decisions, who gets to allocate resources, and there's bound to be disagreements about this. There are bound to be differences of view, and what's important is that the whole country is engaged in this conversation, and that you figure out together what you're going to do in this new world that you've created with clearly articulated set of rights and responsibilities. But there's a lot. It's a big challenge. Okay, more questions.
It's quite an expensive business as well.
It's an expensive business, yes.
Ambassador, you've been in such interesting places. pre-Arab Spring in Tunisia, Iraq. You're now here. Can you just give us a picture as from with all that experience, what the world looks like to somebody like you right now? Does it look a safer place? I mean, every day wherever we look, whether it's Syria, whether it's Kiev, Ukraine, South China Sea, it looks a very sort of scary. Going back to your JFK, I was watching a documentary about the time when the missiles went to Cuba. It feels as if anything could happen. It feels as if a small mistake would trigger a terrible situation. Is that right, or am I wrong? What would you?
I think there are huge challenges in the world today, and I think certainly one of the defining ones is the threat of violent extremism, this kind of radical Islamist philosophy that poses a threat in Kenya and in countries all over the globe. I do think that is a dangerous situation. It's a huge challenge. I think if you look at places like the Middle East and some of the places where there are problems, whether it be sort of Syria, Iraq with ISIS, whether it's Yemen with what's going on there, or Boko Haram, Nigeria, it's a huge challenge, and I do think that there are big risks around it. Obviously, there are other places that face big challenges. I mean, North Korea, there are challenges there. So there's just a range of issues around the world that do pose big risks. At the same time, I would just observe that we had big challenges before. I mean, obviously, the competition between the Soviet Union and the United States, the Cuban Missile Crisis, looking back to 1962. I mean, there's been a number of things that have happened across time which posed risks to the world. The threats are new in some important respects. The challenges are huge, and I don't think we should minimize them. I do think they require some new responses from all of us. I think they require strong international coordination and commitment, whether it be through the United Nations or through other sorts of coalitions or efforts. I do think it requires a commitment by people to engage. I think particularly kind of the threat of radical violent extremism is big. So there are lots of issues out there.
My name is Oshina Kara. I'm an ICT consultant. My question to you is, let's talk now business matters.
Good.
Is there a platform where budding entrepreneurs, existing entrepreneurs, can come to either interact with venture capitalists, financials, get to interact with them, and also maybe have that relationship where they can invest, transfer skill sets, mentor the entrepreneurs in Kenya? Is there a platform or a forum where entrepreneurs can interact with the American business people and financial investors?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Moses. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for that speech. It's quite highly eye-opening. I just want to paraphrase a few of the comments you made before I ask my question. One of the sentences was like, corruption is a threat to the Kenya's growth, which is true. And the second question was that America is standing with Kenyans in the fight against corruption. And also you did mention that the American government is investing heavily in Kenya, 80 billion Kenyan shillings, if I'm not quote your figure. Now I'm just wondering if this statement, standing with Kenya in the fight against corruption, has any value or is holding any water. If you're not going to tell us any concrete things that the US government is doing in the fight against corruption or helping Kenya fight the corruption side. Recently we saw what the US government is doing when it comes to corruption allegations against FIFA. They aggressively went for the boys. And tell us exactly what your government is doing. Thank you.
Actually, Ambassador, Alex was one of the people who came to me this week and said, what are the economic benefits of the Obama visit? So And you answered it. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Alex Chamada. I'm a freelance journalist and special correspondent for KTN now. I'll take you back to the issue of Somalia. Somaliland has been claiming to be more stable, peaceful, they conduct their own elections. In fact, they claim to be safer than many countries in the Horn of Africa. That the last time they had of any bomb or terror attack was in 2008. It happened so often in Kenya. But it's not recognized. They claim to have even a stable economy more than the Somalia wing of Mogadishu. What's the position of US on the clamor for recognition by Somaliland? And should Somaliland's independence be recognized, what would be the impact on the peace and stability in the region? Because the authorities there claim they are role models. They have something to offer to the region. My second point is a comment. You talked about, or rather, so many questions have been raised about advisories. This is my view. You see, when you are in Kenya and you hear about Boko Haram in Nigeria or attacks in Somalia, then you think it's the whole of Somalia. I go to Somalia and people ask, how did you survive? I just came from Nigeria. People ask me, you are not attacked by Boko Haram. So you tend to get that picture. The whole country is bad. But when I go to a place like Nigeria, and I'm not speaking to, or rather I'm not speaking for the US government, you are given advisories. The ambassador there was telling me the do's and don'ts, where to go, where not. But it doesn't mean the whole of Nigeria is not safe. So advisories are given. It's just that maybe we misunderstand the US or UK advisories. The headlines would read US advisories against Kenya, but I doubt that I've ever seen against Kenya. Probably it's specific. For example, the UK one was on certain areas where they were advising their nationals not to go, like Garissa. So probably I think we blow advisories out of proportion, but I'm not speaking for the US government. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I think the other problem with this is, to anyone outside Kenya, Garissa, the distance of Garissa from Nairobi is probably an unknown thing, and they're never going to find it out. All they're seeing is Garissa is in Kenya, and we can't change that. I think, and that is, I think, the problem. In also in part, to add to that. Sorry to interrupt the flow. I'll take one more question before we go.
Thank you. Very interesting, Your Excellency.
Thank you.
Just wanted to add something. We also brought Clorox into Kenya, and that relationship is going across sub-Saharan Africa. So one more addition to the release, another American company. I have the question I have, and I would like you to think outside the box. So our economy is about $16 billion GDP. Right?
It's about 55, yeah. 55. Same size as Lagos. By the way.
If we were to ask you a question, and I'll ask a question after your answer, I want to take you to $110 billion in the next 5 years. And apart from the usual, things like security and corruption, 3 things that would come to your mind first that would help us take this from 55 to 110. And I can think of it, this is like a pimple on an elephant's back, compared to what you do in the US. What can you advise? You've got a lot of experience in this. And I'd like to ask you one small question after your answer.
Sure. And there's also, if I may throw in another question, AGOA. Someone coming saying that it's really achieved its intended purpose. Now its term's coming to an end. What's the next step?
Well, just to answer that AGOA question, and actually AGOA is interesting because I was in South Africa as our economic minister counselor when AGOA first came into place.
What year was that?
About 15 years ago now. And I spent a fair amount of time promoting AGOA to South African businesses. For those of you, I hope most of you know what AGOA is, but just to explain, AGOA is the African Growth and Opportunity Act in the United States, and what it does is allow African countries to export their products duty-free and quota-free to the United States. It's an extraordinary offer. I mean, other regions really don't get this, and it's an opportunity for you, for thousands of different products, to be more competitive in the United States. So AGOA is periodically has to be renewed by our Congress, and they are currently debating the next possible extension of AGOA. And President Obama strongly supports AGOA. And frankly, it has done some good things. It's doing some good things in Kenya. Kenya right now is exporting about maybe $300 million a year worth of products.
Is that latest data?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't take absolute note of that, but that's a rough figure. But so roughly 300 million under AGOA. It's mostly apparel. And it makes you much more competitive, for example, vis-a-vis factories in, say, the Far East. It's a great deal. It really is a good deal. And my own experience with it, whether it be at the beginning of AGOA or more recently when I came back to Kenya, is that there's a lot of space for more. There's a lot of opportunity for more. You can export much more to the United States under AGOA. And frankly, develop your economy, create jobs, create and build prosperity. So I would very much like to see, as would President Obama, AGOA extended. It's a completely free offer that's on the table for businesses that want to take it up.
Just to confirm, in one conversation with Aidan, who's the CS for industrialization, he was saying there was really strong job growth in this AGOA-related stuff, textile, apparels. And just in the private sector, we've met a couple of people who are putting facilities in. So speaking to that, I've got to commend you on that.
There's a potential huge American investment here in Kenya, huge, that would create a very large number of jobs. And it's based on the opportunity created by AGOA. Anyway. So a platform where entrepreneurs can interact with American businesses and entrepreneurs. I have to tell you, outside of sort of maybe one-off things that have taken place, or I suppose entrepreneurs might approach the American Chamber of Commerce or something like that, but I'm not really familiar at the moment. I don't know. Alekhan, are you familiar with that?
I think
there are a few places.
There are quite a few, and I would say that is there's a lot of potential in that space. But iHub and NILAB.
There are places that people could go. Certainly iHub or something like that, or there's the. There are places like that, but it's a less formal setup for the most part. Although there certainly are moments. So, for example, I did go to a pitch session that was done recently at iHub, the 1776 competition. So there are sort of things that are out there if you look for them, and iHub's a good example of a place where someone might go. There are places. Frankly, there's a lot of opportunity for more. And one of the things that I would really like to see, and we will have to see if it happens, there's certainly no guarantees, I would really like to see come out of the Global Entrepreneurship Summit some sort of more sustained, systemic, large-scale way to do these things, to have engagement between entrepreneurs and to encourage them. Actually, one other area that I should mention that is going to be more like, I think, what you're thinking of is Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI. So one of the three streams of activity, or three areas where we're focused and where we have YALI entrepreneurs, or YALI fellows, is entrepreneurship. So there are entrepreneurs who are part of the YALI program. And as part of this, we're setting up a Young African Leaders Initiative center, a leadership center, a regional leadership center here in Kenya. And so that center will become a focal point for training and outreach and engagement going forward, and I expect that will be opened up in the near future. So that will be one example of a good way for us to engage. All right, concrete things in the fight against corruption. Actually, I would tell you there are a lot of very concrete things going on in the fight against corruption. Some of them directly related to it. So, for example, we do have law enforcement contact between the government of the United States and the government of Kenya in areas where we think there's corruption, or where, for example, there might be instances where we have information that we need to share with the government of Kenya. I can't go into detail on those because they're law enforcement related, but there are direct contacts with the government of Kenya in the law enforcement area. So we have actually quite a large legal attache's office here with law enforcement officials present in there. There's a lot of exchange going on. But even more broadly than that, we are working in every part of kind of the system and set of agencies that deal with these challenges. So we work with police, we work with different security agencies that develop information, we work with prosecutors, we work with judges, we are working right now and talking to the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, we're working with IPOA, we've helped to build the Inspectorate General in the police service. So there are, dozens, if not hundreds, of extremely concrete, specific actions that are ongoing and underway to help with corruption. But look, this is going to require, dealing with this problem is going to require a fundamental change in the culture in Kenya. It's going to require the leadership to say no more corruption. It's going to require the people to say no more corruption. President Kenyatta has been quite vocal and quite eloquent in many instances on this issue. But it is going to require everybody coming together. It's going to require everybody to say no to corruption. Only then is this going to change. And we will provide such support and assistance as we can, whether it be developing new systems or methodologies or approaches, strengthening institutions. We will work with you to do that, and we are doing it. And there's certainly many, many concrete examples that I could give. On Somaliland, the view of the United States is that Somalia is a country, an entire country, and that there should be a federal system of government, that there should be a negotiated political arrangement about powers that regions and parts of Somalia should have. That's what we're encouraging. That's what we would like to see. Obviously, it is better if these things are, ultimately the result of kind of a full political negotiation involving the people of Somalia, rather than independent decisions by bits and pieces of the country. On travel advisories, I've already sort of said my piece on travel advisories. I don't want to repeat myself again on this. I will say it is, obviously it's true, Kenya is a big country. What happens in Garissa is pretty far from Nairobi. I will say again that the travel advisory has, in one of its very first sentences, one of the early sentences in the thing, thousands of Americans visit Kenya every year without incident or problem. I will also tell you that if you look at the number of Americans who are coming to Kenya, there really hasn't been all that much change. There's been a little change, but it's not been huge. There are bigger changes out of some other places, and frankly, part of the reason for the United States is Americans who come to Kenya, they come to Kenya either for business, and I have not, frankly, if anything, I've seen an increase in the number of American business people coming, or they come for wildlife tourism. They don't come to go to the beach in Mombasa. Kenya is a long way away from the United States. There are lots of beaches in the United States or in the Caribbean that are very nice, and if you want to go for a beach holiday, that's where you go as an American. So the Americans who come here tend to be very well versed in international travel. They frankly tend to be well educated, and they're largely pretty able to take care of themselves. So, those tourists, many of them are still coming to Kenya, and they're familiar with the distances between places. They get the point. All right, my 3 big ideas, boy. And I can't mention corruption or security. I can't mention those things. You're making things tough on me. So look, I think that there are certainly some big opportunities to increase the rate of real GDP growth here. You're running, I don't know, what was the last number, 5.5%, 6%?
Well, we're expecting 6 this year.
6%.
A lot of that is the SGR, right?
So, good, that's nice. But what Kenya needs is 8, 9, 10% real GDP growth for a sustained period of time, assuming you've dealt with the security issues, assuming there's not a corruption issue. What I would tell you is you need infrastructure, you need roads, you need reliable energy that's reasonably priced, competitively priced. I wouldn't do what some countries in this region have done, subsidize power. That's a mistake, in my view. But you need reliable, reasonably priced power. So there's a whole set of challenges around infrastructure that need to be addressed. Some of them are happening, but there is a lot more that needs to happen. There's a second set of challenges just around, frankly, the ease of doing business here. I once went to a country in Southeast Asia, and I was there for a while, and I didn't personally verify this, but I was told by the business people there that if you landed in a plane and went to the investment office in 2 hours, you could register a new business as a foreign company in that country. 2 hours. Now, the reality is that in Kenya, it takes a long time to register a business. There has been some improvement, and I do think, I've heard President Kenyatta on this, and I commend him for it, but there needs to be a simplification of the process. There are efforts underway, but Kenya needs to get down the time it takes to register a business and the general set of procedures and processes, and Andrew was talking a little bit about this earlier too. I mean, there are issues here. You do need to address them, and simplifying the process of doing business, the rules and regulations and all of the rest of it, critically important, and I think that as well would, frankly, deal with some of the problems. If you wanted a sort of a third area, there's certainly a lot of things I could name. We talked a little bit about education earlier. I think it's critically important that you have a trained workforce. I could certainly name things like the land issues here. Kenya's got a fundamental challenge around land. You said don't mention security, but I'll mention even sort of beyond things like terrorism. There are issues obviously around tribal conflict, ethnicity, other issues that could and should and need to be addressed across time. So there are a number of other sorts of things. But if you just look at the economic areas, there are some opportunities to get your growth rate up and to get to 110 billion US dollars in a relatively short space of time. Anyway, there are a lot of different opportunities.
You were going to come back.
Yes. So you talked about infrastructure. We've just put up a Wrigley's factory in Machakos. Most of the business is done, towards the west of Machakos. A little bit goes to Mombasa and places like that. I'm actually very frustrated. Coming from Westlands to industrial area, the traffic normally. That traffic should actually take about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And I've done that in 25 minutes. Question is, could you help us build an overpass from Westlands?
I would love to help you build an overpass. I would love to expand the roads here. I too have been trapped for hours and hours in traffic here in Kenya. And it is frustrating when, it should take me about 25 minutes to get from my home to Nairobi's airport to Jomo Kenyatta. It should take me 25 minutes, and at midnight on Thursday night or something, I can get there in 25 minutes. But normally during the day, I'm lucky if it's an hour. And it could be 2, it could be 3. We've had people recently take 5 hours to get from the American embassy to the airport. That is ridiculous. So look, the United States does not, as a general matter, the United States government does not, as a general matter, build roads directly. Although I would point out that because people often ask me, why don't you do more about infrastructure? And the truth is the United States does help with infrastructure. We don't do so directly for the most part. I'll caveat this in a second. But mostly what we do it through is our contributions to the World Bank and the African Development Bank. So Thika Highway is partly financed using American money. So you are seeing American infrastructure investment through these multilateral development institutions. And there are ways in which recently we've done some more things around infrastructure. So Power Africa is a good example of this. We're helping in a variety of ways through OPIC and EXIM and through transaction advisors in various ways to help Kenya and other African countries build power generation capability. So there are some things that we are doing in that area. But sadly, I can't help you directly, the Westlands Overpass, as much as I might agree with you that it would be a good thing for all of us.
Morning, my name is Brian, I'm a student at the University of Nairobi. Also that you mentioned basically that it's quite a consensus that the Silicon Valley industry in America is going to be the largest industry in the world currently, possibly ever. Do you think it's an advised move, it's a well-advised move to try and replicate that here and in the rest of the world? And also, might you be in a position to comment about the possibility of America having the first female president?
Thank you, Mr. Sachi, Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shirley Meru. I work in international development, principally in Francophone Africa, in Nigeria. My question for you is, I would like to know your thoughts on gender and professional advancement and equality. A while back, I was reading the memoirs of Providence Bushnell, who was the American ambassador when the American embassy was formed in 1998. And she says that as soon as she landed in Kenya, she started writing memorandums to Washington, telling them that they needed to move the American embassy. And what she writes is that she experienced problems as a woman, because nobody would listen to her, and what some people would even call her emotional or imbalanced. And she insinuates that if a man was raising the same problem, he would have been listened to. So I've been in many boardrooms where I've seen women say something and they were totally ignored, and when a man said it, it was taken more seriously. So I was very surprised because I was in such a position even as a woman in a developed country that you pretty much managed to break the glass ceiling. So my question to you is, as a man in such a senior position, what advice would you give for to women in boardrooms to shout out and be heard and not just be taken as troublemakers but exciting collaborators, especially now that more women in Africa are getting access to boardrooms? Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity. Now, listening to the questions, there's always this reference to an ideology or a mentality that probably Africans are not as able to do certain things as people of other colors are. Now, I agree to a certain extent that maybe sometimes Uncle Sam can be a bit of a fool. And you've gotten, there's that general feeling from some of the questions that people have raised. And when I say Uncle Sam, I mean the United States, for those who don't know. Now, I attended a forum last weekend at USMU, and it was a forum of young people who were in IT, and it was good to see the kind of inventions that they're having to try and make Kenya a better place. I'm talking of people like Taifa Summit and NAFLAB, and there's also foreign companies, Cisco Systems, and they've put up they're using technology to give people in the side of Amboseli
and Busia access to doctors in Nairobi. So instead of this person coming all the way to Nairobi, they get to access the doctor via the internet. Now, many people here, or many of us here, are complaining about corruption, and we're complaining about the traffic situation in our country. And we're asking the ambassador how their country can help us. But what steps are we taking as Kenyans to help ourselves? We're complaining about corruption. How many times have you been stopped by a police officer and instead of going through the system, you opted to give him 200 shillings? How many of us have done that?
That's a very reasonable price,
Yeah.
according to you.
Very true.
These days it's like 5,000.
Yeah. Many of us use matatus and you see how they're very flashy. How many times have you bashed your driver when he's not overlapping? Like, you know what, in the office at 8 a.m., why aren't you overlapping? You're going to be late. And then when you get stopped by a police officer, you know how much money they have to back you just because he was overlapping for your sake. So a large portion of the problems we are having, we are contributing to. How many of us sit down to watch parliamentary proceedings? They happen roughly 3 to 4 days in a week. Good, that's one person. How many of us do that? It is very disconcerting to sit down and see when they're discussing raising their salary, the house is full to the extent that some of them sit on the floor. When they're discussing water projects, medical projects, barely 50 are in that house. So maybe we need to take time and not place all our problems on our colonizers and the first world countries, and take time.
Wait a minute.
To think about how we're contributing to our problems. We are the ones who voted this parliamentary power, and maybe we need to start taking seriously the whole idea of African solutions to African problems, because we're very able to do that. Most of the equipment you are seeing at Machakos Level 5 Hospital, there is enough lab at University of Nairobi. He said it's from University of Nairobi. There's a lab there where they go and innovate. Most of the equipment you saw at Machakos Level 5 Hospital, we have university students from University of Nairobi and other universities at that lab coming up with similar equipment, and they're being funded by an international organization. So we have the capacity. So let's stop playing weak and making excuses, because we really have no excuse. We have the capacity to do so. We are just lazy. Let's just lazy and
So first on the question about Silicon Valley. You know, Silicon Valley is an extraordinary place. It's very special in so many different ways, and I think we could have a long conversation about what made Silicon Valley possible. But I will tell you that I've seen some very impressive things here in Nairobi too, that sort of are in the Silicon Valley area of work. Obviously, the iHub would be a very, very, significant example, but there are many, many others. There are Kenyans here, as I mentioned in my speech, writing world-beating software. So I would encourage the idea that Kenya should look for ways to be part of this new technology, the information communications technology landscape. I think it is possible, and I would encourage the thought that there are some opportunities there for you. I've seen Kenyans do brilliant work in this space, so why not? Why not find ways to encourage it and be part of it? It's doing so many wonderful things for all of us around the world. A big part of the economy around the world these days is built around communications, computer technology, software, all of the rest of it. So there's a lot of opportunity, and I would encourage it in Kenya. On the question of a woman president of the United States, I don't have any idea, because I don't have a crystal ball, when there will be a woman president of the United States. But one thing I am absolutely confident of is that sooner or later there will be a woman president of the United States. I think it is a matter of time, a question of which person will win. So I think that women make extraordinary contributions in whatever walk of life they're in, whether they're politicians or scientists or other areas of life. And so I'm confident that sooner or later, one of these days, the United States will have as our president a woman. Which leads very well into the question of women's professional development. Look, you know, there is no doubt that women do face special challenges, and you know, we've come a long way in the United States, but I'm still stunned as an American thinking back in our own history to realize, for example, that women only got the vote in the United States about 100 years ago. That's extraordinary. I can hardly conceive of it, but the truth is that women throughout history have faced discrimination and problems and challenges and have had hurdles to overcome. And that was true in the United States. It's still true in the United States. It's true in Africa. It's true in Kenya. There are things there are obstacles that are in place. And I think that it's incumbent on all of us to work to lift those obstacles, to remove them, and to ensure that women are fully part of the society. Secretary Kerry said at one point, no country can develop when it leaves 50% of its population behind. Countries that fully engage, include, involve women are stronger. They're richer. They're more peaceful, I think, in many respects. I mean, there's just a wide range of ways in which you build a stronger society when you include everybody in the society. In terms of advice for women, and particularly young women, you know, I think that as I look back across my career, you know, and I've seen many women develop, become great leaders and strong leaders. I do think there are special challenges that they face, and I do think that, you know, it's important to obviously have the right education, to, you know, to network, to develop mentorships, to do everything you can to meet the challenges and to confront them when they develop. So there are challenges out there, and I am glad to see, you know, more and more organizations and groups that are working, in fact, to provide women opportunities and to ensure that they get the support and assistance that they need to develop along the way. On the last question, or it was really more of a comment, I have to say, it was a statement. Yeah, I agree absolutely that Africans need to lead in Africa. That is my firmly held view. It is absolutely the case that Africans can accomplish extraordinary things. And you know, I've seen it 1,000 times, and I mentioned it a little bit in my speech. I've seen incredible things happen when people are empowered to lead, to help themselves, to do the things needed to build a better life. So I have confidence that this continent can succeed. I have confidence that Kenya specifically can succeed. And the United States is going to continue to be there as a friend and a partner to help with this. But I do think that today, here in East Africa, that it is, you know, it's critically important that Africans are in the leadership role, and you're building the country, the Kenya that you want. Whether that means refusing to pay a bribe, or whether it means writing a world-beating piece of software, whether it means helping to mentor a woman or some young man who is trying to get ahead, whether it means whatever. These are things. There are 1,000 opportunities every day. So I would just encourage you to seize the opportunities that are out there and to build the country that you want as Kenyans.
I'd like to thank Your Excellency for an outstanding and very interactive and interesting mind speak. I think deserves a round of applause. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.